early 70s and early 80s, you know, being Croatian in this country was very hard. The media, as the media usually does, got on a feeding frenzy with so-called Croatian terrorism issues, all of which were either blown way out of proportion or they were just simply not true.
To je bilo kao da mi Hrvati smo teroristi, ali mi nismo teroristi. Teroristi su oni koji su nas osudili i koji su nas zatvorili.
It's a hot Australian summer night in February 1979 and Roger Rogerson is at the front door with a squad of Sydney's toughest cops. Sticks of gelignite are discovered and the family's young men, brothers Ilya and Joe Korkatovic, and friend Mile Nekic are taken away for a very rough night at police headquarters in Sydney. They are joined by others, Vic Brajkovic and Tony Zvirotic, arrested in simultaneous raids. Max Bebic is arrested by cops in the New South Wales country town of Lithgow, outside of Sydney. A seventh Croat, Vico Verkez, an explosives enthusiast, was also arrested with Bebic.
So it was 40 years ago, one hot summer night in Sydney. Family had come home after Thursday night late shopping, parked the cars in the driveway, come in, having dinner, feeding the kids, the young babies, putting them to sleep. And out on the street, they didn't know there were 4 or 5 carloads of Sydney detectives. When they'd all come home about 10 o'clock, there was a banging on the front door and in poured detectives led by Roger Rogerson. Another group went around the back of the house and came in through the kitchen door. They stormed in and allegedly found the young men with some gelignite and detonators on a desk. They were arrested. It was pandemonium. The young women were screaming their heads off. The babies were crying. And within an hour, it was all wrapped up. The family were left seeing the cars drive away, found out that they should go to the Central Court the next morning, where they found their menfolk in a very, very bedraggled state. So this is the door that the young women, Christine and Lydia, opened on that hot night in 1979 to find Roger Rogerson and a posse of Sydney's toughest cops pushing their way in. The women allege with pistols drawn, the police say not, but they stormed in to the house and began their search.
Oh, you can go in, there's nothing.
Yeah. So the police stormed up these stairs, turned around a couple of the young men, brought them back in here, and in this attic, which used to be presumably a servant's maid's quarters, the boys had set up desks and had all their propaganda material, the Croatian leaflets and so on, a cyclist-style machine, typewriter, and they were busily putting out brochures when the police came up, grabbed them, and allegedly found 2 sticks of gelignite on the desk with some detonators and other explosive items. They were then taken downstairs and out to the police station in the centre of town.
Well, if there's a suggestion that at Burwood the evidence was planted, well, you'd have needed a bloody tip truck or something, or a fairly big truck to take all the evidence there in the first place. I know that I've got a recollection that whoever was there were as surprised as buggery, like when we bashed on their door, especially armed with shotguns and etc., etc. And then, of course, when we searched the place, and of course, as I said, I've got this clear recollection of, I'm sure it was a chook shed, an old chook shed, right down in the back, I think it was the back left-hand corner from memory. And as I said, it had bags and bags of fertiliser and all this diesel and stuff. Well, now, for someone to say that was planted, I don't know how they would have planted it without the occupants knowing someone was in their backyard or carting all this shit down there and putting it in the shed so we could come along later and say, ha, we found all this evidence. So I think to suggest that was planted to be a pretty tall order.
Does it make any sense to you?
It says something dolje, which means down.
Yeah.
Are these slogans of some sort?
I think Elena wrote it. These are some slogans that the young Kokatovich brothers wrote when they were propagandizing against the Yugoslav regime in 1979-78 before they were arrested. These remnants still remain in their old garage at the back of their house in Sydney's inner west. And that was the beginning of a nightmare. The young men ended up with 15-year jail terms. For the Croatian Australian community, it was a shattering blow to their standing in the wider Australian community. They were tainted with the aura of terrorism, and little did Australia know it was all a set-up. They had been set up by the Yugoslav intelligence agency to achieve exactly this result.
The Croatian Six were alleged to have conspired in 1979 with their fellow Croat Vico Vrquez to begin a terror bombing campaign in Sydney in protest against the Yugoslav communist government's control of their homeland Croatia. Yet, as it turned out, Vico Vrquez was not really Vico Vrquez, nor a Croat. His real name was Vitomir Misimovic, and he was a Bosnian Serb. Vrquez was in constant contact with the Yugoslav consulate in Sydney, an odd thing to do for someone who claimed to be a Croatian nationalist fighting for independence. In reality, Vrquez was an operative for the Yugoslav intelligence service, known as UDBA, which had a fierce reputation for overseas assassinations of opponents and false flag operations. Vrquez turned Crown witness against the Croatian Six, who were sentenced to 15 years jail in 1981 for terrorist conspiracy. The men maintained their innocence and appealed their convictions, but lost. Vrquez was eventually allowed to leave Australia and settled in Bosnia, Yugoslavia. Australia's domestic spies, the Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO, was closely monitoring Vico Vrquez. Legendary Australian investigative reporter Chris Masters was the first to break the Croatian Six story on Australian television.
You tracked down the informer Vico Vrquez, who we now know was working closely with the Yugoslav intelligence service, and you found him back on his pig farm in Bosnia.
Yeah.
And he fronted up that he had fabricated the lot.
Yes, well, I mean, the ferret went down the burrow that Vico Vrquez was there in Bosnia, and so, you know, not a small project for the ABC in Four Corners, but we decided to go there, and he was forthcoming. I remember sitting and interviewing him, and there was a drift of rain.
So let me get this clear. 6 men, the 2 Kokatovic brothers, Bebic, Viritic, Nekic, Brajkovic, you gave evidence against them. In your view, were they all guilty?
No.
Were they all guilty of a conspiracy to blow up all of those targets?
No.
Could it be that they were all innocent?
Yeah, could be.
ASIO were looking very closely at UDBA and tracking them, but you know, the problem with intelligence services is that they come to regard the information and the sources of the information as more valuable, more a thing to be protected than the rights of Australians who are subject to those activities.
I don't remember anyone from Asia actually being present at either the Ananda Marga situation or the Croatian Six situation. Earlier on, you know, in the 60s, with different bombings and what have you, that the Croatians were the baddies.
This was also the height of the Cold War, and communist Yugoslavia, run by the wily Marshal Tito, was pro-West and outside the Soviet bloc. Australia, being a loyal US ally, didn't want to create too many waves in pursuing claims of Yugoslav interference on Australian soil. For Washington, Independence for Croatia was simply out of the question. Ian Cunliffe was a senior legal advisor to Australia's Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, in the late 1970s, early 1980s.
Based on my own experience, including having been the only lawyer on the staff of the First Royal Commission on Intelligence and Security and on the staff of the Protective Security Review about intelligence and security matters. And the conclusion that I drew was that Verkes was a Yugoslav intelligence agent and he had been an agent provocateur in relation to the alleged conspiracy that the six were convicted of. He had been the moving light in that. He had provided the expertise in terms of being able to make explosives and so forth. I was told, for example, that he had demonstrated his expertise to Australian authorities by dismantling a detonator. I'm told that if you or I tried to do that, we would blow our hands off and probably blow our eyes out. But he was not the simple Yugoslav peasant that he claimed to be. He was a highly trained member of the Yugoslav intelligence service. And meeting, there was a discussion that I participated in with the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, a man called John Enfield, who had an intelligence and security background, now dead, and a man called Richardson John. And John Enfield said, we must not tell the Prime Minister anything about this.
When I have a look at the impact and, on the people, the guys that were arrested, it did impact on them and their lives, but it also impacted on, family members, and there was a bigger implication than just the individual. So for me personally, it really, it really shattered my family. And with that, for my sort of girls growing up, you're sort of too emotionally damaged to be able to sort of be a full-on board parent at the time. And I can see that's got further implications as they grow up, and it impacts on their sort of their life as they've grown up, not only mine. And it's really sad because something like that you can never give back. You can never get that sort of life back. It's gone. So.
And you didn't see any of the evidence that the police claimed they found in your house?
No, there was no evidence. I mean, we had little children in the house. There was no evidence at all. There was nothing like that. It was just, we were just a normal family going. I mean, I was 8.5 months pregnant, and we were looking forward to sort of the next baby and that. So no, there was nothing. And that's the sad thing about it, and that's what makes me really cranky, because you have a look at, and you're in a country where you feel you've got the law and there's justice and things like that, and there's no things like conspiracy theories, but the reality for us is there was, and that's what's really sad, because you sit in society very comfortable with that knowledge, that you feel that you've got the law, but in this case they were set up. Have a look at Roger Rogerson, and for me, I just think, well, there is karma,
But not yet justice for these six?
No, not yet justice. But even with justice, it's really hard, because you can't give somebody back their lives, and that's the sad thing, because life's gone on, and a lot of people have been damaged, and that's very hard to fix. But there's also always that knowledge that it's there, it's obvious, it's been brought out, and it still hasn't been sorted out, and it should have been.
kada ovi drugi policajci, oni su došli, bilo je 5-6 njih, imali su pištole i kaže, okreni se prema zidu, ja sam se okrenio prema zidu, kaže, stavi ruke na zid, jedan je uzeo pištol, mene je lupio po glavi, tako da sam imao jedan veliki tu. I ovi su imali drugo oružje, počeli su me tući puškama su me tukli u leđa, u moja rebra su me tukli, stavili su mi lisce na ruku, jedan detektiv bi me uvatio za kosu i kako sam imao poveću kosu, on mene povuče, ja otvorim usta, vičem, kako me bolilo, on meni gurne pištol u usta, drugi govori, kaže, shoot the bloody bastards. Ja nemam ništa s tim. Ja sam došao u Australiju da radim, ne da pravim bombe, ja sam došao tu i radio sam.
Well, I've just seen Vic Brajkovic. He's now 70 years old. His flat, he's packing up his flat. He's preparing to move back to Croatia. He's in a very distressed state, still very upset, and talked about the beating he said he had from the police at the CIB on the night of his arrest. He feels defeated by justice in New South Wales. He won't speak. He says he's not in a condition to speak to anyone. I hope we can do something for him.
Dobro mogu razumjeti, pošto moj engleski nije dobar, oni mene nisu doveli tumača, oni su napisali neke papire na engleski i meni su rekli da ja to moram potpisati. A ja sam bio toliko uplašen i oni su meni prijetili, ako to ne potpišeš, mi ćemo te ubiti.
So this is the old Central Police Station of Sydney. The suspects rounded up in the raids from 4 locations in Sydney were brought here late one night around 10 or 11 p.m. while the time they got here. They were taken into this building and then up into an annex next door, which was the headquarters of the Central Investigation Bureau, CIB, a notorious collection of detectives formed into squads that were used to dealing with bank robbers, safe crackers, and other very violent criminals. They were tough but smart police. The young Croatians were brought in here, taken upstairs, separated, and then according to their testimony in the court, in the trial, they were very brutally bashed, and they alleged that their confessions were fabricated and signed off by an inspector at the station here. After that experience, they were put in cells and then produced to the desk sergeant at the Central Police Station, who took photographs of them without noticing any injuries or signs of violence, fingerprinted, and then at 10 o'clock produced before the magistrate at the courthouse at the back of the station here, Central Court of Petty Sessions, booked and then taken off to Long Bay Jail, where at least in one case the prison doctors and nurses noted signs of violence against one of the prisoners.
I thought what the police did to the 6 was the sort of thing that you think Russian secret police do, you know, belting the tripe out of them to get a confession. This hadn't happened in the Soviet Union or communist Yugoslavia. It had actually happened in New South Wales.
So it was here in May 1980 that the trial of the Croatian 6 began. It lasted 8 months, the longest criminal trial in Australia's history and that of the Commonwealth as well. And in the end, the men were all found guilty and sentenced to 15 years. The judge was an old-fashioned type who could not believe that the police might have done anything wrong during the interrogations or searches. He told the jury it was the word of the 6 defendants against 39 upstanding policemen. And so began 10 years of incarceration until they were let out with good behaviour. All their appeals failed because the appeals judges said whatever the other evidence, they had confessed, and that was damning for these 6 men. Except we know there were strong doubts about all of those confessions.
In New South Wales, and it horrifies me to see such a perversion of the criminal justice system. That is one of the things that drove me and still drives me to seek justice. Now, I can't give back the years that these guys spent in jail as a result of their prosecutions, but their reputations should be cleared. It should be clear on the face of it that they were set up and that this was one of the worst examples of malpractice by the New South Wales Police Force, including that wonderful man Roger Rogerson, who was fully involved in these activities.
And you had all that, you broadcast that, and then it disappeared into the judicial machinery, and 2 years later, on the recommendation of a government lawyer, the State Attorney General recommended against a review of the convictions.
Well, of course, that was no big surprise to me. I'd done plenty of stories about miscarriage of justice in Australia, and the system never wants to admit that it's got it wrong. It never wants to admit that that the public could in any way lose faith in the system. So I thought it was an absolute wrong judgment, but it didn't surprise me.
Yeah, and so looking at this case, comparing it to, say, the Birmingham 6 or the Guildford 4, do you think it's in that league?
Yes, I think it's not only a miscarriage of justice, but it's one that involved a group of people. They were clearly innocent. A huge number of people looked the other way. And so I thought it was outrageous then as I do now.